Joining us now to review some of the headlines of today's newspapers from around the world is Adefemi Akinsanya. Good morning.
Good morning,
Adefemi.
Dr. Rubin. How are you doing?
Morning,
Good morning.
Adefemi.
Bye. Good morning. Bye. How's everybody?
Very well.
Lovely, lovely, lovely. Okay, well, let's get into our papers. We'll start, of course, with our Nigerian papers, the first of which being the front page of This Day. And they're looking at a deal that's been struck up. Then essentially what's happened is Nigeria's upstream oil regulator has approved the sale of 2 onshore assets which are held by international oil companies with presence here in Nigeria. And those sales are going to Owando and Equinor. And essentially, it's an example of, one, Nigeria's oil sector being able to take more control of the presence of its own revenues, its own natural resources, but also it's an example of some international oil majors exiting their Nigerian oil shores. And it's interesting to see this development happen because you'd imagine that this is a business-focused decision. Why are these international oil majors wanting to exit their onshore assets? And I guess the bigger reasons that jump out are because of theft, vandalism, and pollution. So it'd be interesting to see in what role these Nigerian majors that are now taking control of these onshore capabilities, what they'll be able to do with that. Moving on from This Day to the front page of The Guardian. The Guardian are looking at the upturn in electronic waste. That's the front page of The Guardian. And essentially what they're looking at is the change in economic and household spending. What they're looking at is the fact that more Nigerian households are relying on second-hand electronic and household appliances to get around this cost of living crisis. And in doing so, they say that this increases the amount of electronic waste in the country because if we're saying that 500,000 tons of discarded appliances are coming into Nigeria for as imports, a very, very small percentage of that, they're saying 25%. Some would say it's even less. 25% of these used electronics coming into Nigeria are good enough to be used once they arrive. But the lion's share of those imports of used electronics, 75% of which and more, they either end up being junked or burned, which contributes to environmental degradation and pollution in the country. So they're taking a look at both sides of this ecosystem. One, looking at the cost of household appliances and how people can get around them, but also this whole reliance on second-hand electronic appliances is also contributing to electronic waste and as a result, pollution in the country. Moving on from the front page of The Guardian, we take a look at The Vanguard. And The Vanguard are looking at medical costs. I know that they use drugs. When I see drugs, I automatically think illicit drugs. So I'm going to say medicines in the meantime. But essentially, they're looking at the cost of medicines going to rise inevitably because of this cost of living crisis, but also because they say that Nigeria's current pharmaceutical manufacturers and packagers, the number of them, they are struggling to keep up with the number of imports coming into the country. And as a result of that, the number of pharmaceutical manufacturers and packagers we have in Nigeria, according to The Vanguard, total around 200. Of those 200, just 43% are responsible for the manufacturing and the packaging of readily available over-the-counter medicines that you can get at any pharmacy, and 38% of them are responsible for the affordable generics you see in the market. But when you're looking at more expensive name brand medicines, Nigerian manufacturers only contribute 12% of them to the market. So that is a glaring example of the disparity between what we're able to produce in the country and what we're bringing in and the prices being associated with them. Moving on from that to the front page of The Punch, they, of course, have been looking at the flooding that we've seen in Lagos. We had over 10 hours of rainfall just yesterday. This is, of course, an example of a natural disaster, but not something that comes too much as a surprise because this is the country's rainy season, and you've just had Tokunbo Wahab discussing about his plans for Lagos State specifically when it comes to the management of these types of issues. And then lastly, we take a look at the front page of the Daily Trust. They are focusing on the Samoa agreement, which has come with a little bit of controversy. The Samoa agreement, as far as Nigeria is concerned, looks at $150 billion worth of deals that Nigeria signed with the European Union in connection with an organization of African Caribbean, and Pacific countries. Within this deal, there is an expectation that this money will go towards the promotion of human rights in the country, environmental stability, economic growth, migration, security, and social development. A subsection of that takes a look at LGBTQ relationships, takes a look at their presence and how they've been ostracized in many of these signatory countries. And I think because of their involvement in this deal, it has turned into a bit of controversy. I don't think any of us are unaware that in Nigeria, same-sex marriages and relationships have completely been outlawed. And there's been a lot of back and forth between more conservative groups in this country who don't think that Nigeria should have signed this deal because of this provision. They interpret this as a promotion of LGBTQ rights as though it's a negative thing. But this is what we're looking at. There are many instances that this $150 billion facility is supposed to promote, one of them being absolutely human rights. And I don't think that it's specifically on one major issue, but it does seem as though that's how it's been interpreted. So those are the Nigerian papers that we're looking at today. There's been a range of issues, economics, of course. But yes, go ahead and jump in.
You see, that's the sad part of collecting most of these aid deals and things like that, like the Samoa agreement, because it's not today. You can remember the country, Uganda, what they fought, how the president had to stand tall. So when you are getting deals like this from the diasporan community, or I mean on the West, I should say, definitely it will be switching with deals with LGBT. But we had a big conversation about LGBT after we passed the Same-Sex Prohibition Act, into law. So it's outlawed here. And we must be able to know what we want. Do we want to collect this juicy amount without preconditions or look for the ones that have? It's not today Nigeria has been collecting money from it. In fact, yesterday I was reading the federal papers of 61, 62, 63 at the first 3 years of independence when I saw that people like the Ford Foundation and the Carnegie Institute were pumping money into Nigeria for education. I think University of Ibadan and things like that to fund libraries and things like that. So we'll definitely get these funds, but what appeases you is what you will go for. As regards the pharmaceutical sector, I have friends that own pharmacies in this country, and the big problem, number one, is the chemicals for producing the drugs, which would border around conversations around API for drugs and things like that. Due to the increase in the dollar to the naira, current forex exchange, you're having a lot of problems as regards how to source that. Also, manufacturing cost has also increased, There's been a big debate as regards getting APIs here locally. I think recently Emzor raised some money, from Afrexim back and thereabout to be able to set up like a proper API factory. Let's see how that pans out. But when you look at it on the point of parity, you still see API being cheaper in countries like China, than other parts of the world. So it goes back into the big pharma and the pharmaceutical ecosystem politicking and, the scale up and the cost, benefit analysis that happens. And that's why you're seeing that it's just a paltry sum of 12% production for all those top of the range drugs and things like that. I mean, take for instance, for people that battle high blood pressure and hypertension, most of the hypertension pills are still pretty much produced by Teva and imported into the country. I think it's only, across that value chain, maybe only low dose of Sprane or Vasoprene, that you have an alternative being produced locally that is quite cheaper, here and all of that. But if you want to buy, both from the bigger brands like Bayers of this world, a pack can set you back 500-600 naira, but a pack for Bayer can set you over 10,000 naira. So, you have those disparities, but we must invest in the local pharmaceutical sector.
Just very quickly, quick statement, e-waste, second-hand electronic appliances, goes back to a conversation we were having yesterday about trying to encourage local manufacturing so that we stop buying. I mean, people are now importing cell phones, second-hand cell phones from the UK and the US. It's unfortunate. We can manufacture this stuff locally.
We're talking about waste from Europe. In 1988, we had the cocoa toxic waste incident, where Nigeria was a dumping ground from waste from Europe. And the effect that had on the cocoa community was what led to the establishment of the Federal Environmental Protection Agency and subsequently the Ministry of the Environment. Before then, Nigeria was not talking about how to protect the environment, but it has worsened since then. The objective of achieving 1.5 degrees centigrade carbon emission, we've not been able, the entire world has not been able to meet it. The United Nations is complaining. The International Panel of Scientists, they are complaining. Now, there is some kind of distortion in the world order. You have used items in Europe being moved this way to Africa, to the developing, underdeveloped countries, without anybody worrying about implications for the environment. And so you see Nigerians buying used items from Europe, including cars, including refrigerators, without looking at the effect on their health, because those items are much cheaper. And Nigeria is not committing itself enough to the declaration in 1988 to address the threat to the environment and to human health. Now, speaking about pharmaceuticals, now the latest information in that regard, I get the complaint that local production is dropping and all that. I think last week or so, about 2 weeks ago, President Tinubu signed Executive Order 003. That Executive Order 003 is supposed to help the pharmaceutical industry in Nigeria. And what does it say? It says the major problem for local production of pharmaceutical products is inputs. Now, sourcing those materials are not easy, so they import. So Executive Order 003 now says, on all of those inputs that are imported, you will not pay taxes, you will not pay tariffs, you will not pay VAT. Now, to what extent that will help remains to be seen. It's for a window of 3 years. The head of the NDLA, of NAFDAC rather, Professor Adeyeye, has already praised this as a major breakthrough. But 3 years, would that be enough to encourage production? 2, what are the details? Pharmacists will say, well, it looks good on paper, but what are the details? Nobody knows. But there is an effort by the Tinubu administration to address that issue. Only as recently as 2 weeks ago, Executive Order 003.
All righty. Let's take a look at some African newspapers. We'll start off with the front cover of the Daily Nation in Kenya, and they're looking at the prospect of a cabinet shuffle looming, looking at William Ruto's cabinet and whether or not some ministers or whomever may lose their positions underneath this cabinet reshuffle. It's not something that's actually been confirmed just yet, but there are reports saying that it is looming, it is coming close. And this would play into the hands of protesters who have been calling on the government for many things, but also for William Ruto to get rid of different politicians, different ministers who were involved, they say, in examples of corruption, and this would be a perfect example for him to take charge and clear his cabinet of dissenters in this way. Some articles are also referring to this prospect at perhaps a little bit of perhaps a blessing, which gives the president, again, the ability to take another look at his cabinet, give him the opportunity to make any changes if he would, but also be able to confirm that this proposed pay rise to state workers is now not going to happen. Essentially, what provisions have been made for was a 2% and 5% increase in the salaries of all state workers, including judges. That has now been frozen. It's not going to happen. And it will be interesting to see if that will be enough to appease Kenyan voters at a time of so much discord and disdain. Moving on from African papers now, we'll take a look at some international ones. Today is election day in the United Kingdom, and you can imagine the front pages of many papers all of the papers are focused on that. We've got the front page of The Sun, which has a play on the football. This is not the front page of The Sun, but essentially the front page of The Sun says it's time for a new manager, and they say, and we don't mean Gareth Southgate, which implies that they believe The Sun itself is aligning itself with the anti-Sunak voice. It's not clear if they don't want a conservative government, but they definitely don't want to see more of Sunak, which I don't think will happen come tomorrow. Moving on from The Sun, you've also got the Daily Express, which conversely looks at a headline that quotes someone, but also, if you look at it, the first thing that jumps out to you is vote Tory. So again, they might not explicitly be saying who they're aligning with these different newspapers, but essentially you've got The Sun on one hand saying that it's time for a new manager, and then you've got the Daily Express with a very long quote, which ends with vote Tory. Then we've also got the front page of the Metro, which has more of a neutral stance. In addition to having Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer, also have representatives of all the different political parties which are going up for elections. I think sometimes when we're looking at these countries, we forget that there are more political parties. So you've got the Green Party, the Independent. So this is what we're looking at. It is, of course, election day today. It will be very interesting to see what happens, but it does seem as though it's going to be a Labour majority coming up.
Well, but what I find interesting about those British papers today is that you know where they stand. They are not ambiguous. It's only in Nigeria that we play games. You know, you are supporting APC at the same time, you are leaning towards PDP, at the same time you are promoting Labour. No, they're very clear. If you see the votary that you said, Daily Express, they were very clear. They said, no, vote Tory, because we believe Labour will give us a catastrophic government. Daily Star was also supporting, I think, the Labour. Yeah, the Daily Mail.
Yes.
It's a Tory paper, conservative-leaning newspaper. But it says vote barrage. It didn't put Rishi Sunak on the front page. But from what they listed in that paper, you see that this is, a Tory newspaper. Daily Mirror, Daily Express,
The Times as well.
So, so they are very clear, about where they stand.
Yes.
And I think that maybe that's a lesson that we should learn in terms of media practice in Nigeria,
we are not there yet, Dr.
where our newspapers are on all sides.
We are not there yet.
We don't
We're not there yet.
we don't take very firm editorial positions in terms of editorial policy.
We're not there yet. We're not there yet.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.